And right now, I want to welcome to the program Chris Cox, NRA ILA Executive Director, is with us. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, starting with the Social Security Administration's gun grab. Chris, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Cam, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's get right to it here. The LA Times reporting over the weekend that an executive action by the president ordering all of these departments to look at ways to increase information submitted to the NICS check. And this would include the Social Security Administration. Millions of Americans who have been appointed a fiduciary to help them with their finances, they could lose they will, in fact, lose their gun rights under this order, Chris.
Cam, this is crazy. I've been with the National Rifle Association for over 20 years. I was on Capitol Hill before then. I've never seen anything like this. It's hard to fathom when we've seen the Obama administration use the IRS as a weapon against certain conservative groups, but this is literally the Obama administration using one of the most respected and trustworthy federal programs in the history of federal programs against the people it's there to serve. I mean, clearly there's big problems in Chicago with the senior citizen gangs, as I'm sure you've read about, but this would be funny if it wasn't such a serious problem. 4.2 million people are about to be banned from owning guns because this president has his cell phone or his phone and his pen, and he hates guns. This is, whether you love guns or hate guns, this ought to scare the dickens out of every American, and we need to make sure we get this message out.
This is, again, these folks would be barred from exercising their right to keep their arms by the bureaucracy.
It's
Chris.
crazy.
In essence, right? A determination by some bureaucrat somewhere. We're going to redefine what it means to be mentally defective. Millions of more Americans will be caught up in this. And frankly, this is one administration. Are you concerned that other departments are going to come back? The LA Times story mentioned Health and Human Services and other cabinet-level departments that are also looking at ways to deny Americans their right to keep and bear arms.
Well, Cam, let's look at where we all agree. Americans across the spectrum agree that people who are terribly mentally ill, who are a danger to themselves and others, shouldn't have legal access to firearms. Of course, we all support those sorts of restrictions. Of course, these gang members in Chicago need to be kept off the streets, and they're not buying their guns through legal means. But clearly, those sorts of prohibitions are accepted by law-abiding gun owners if applied fairly and applied accurately and applied instantaneously, the way the system continues to fail. But this is a whole nother level. You're talking about, as you mentioned, federal bureaucrats, not a judge, not a jury, but federal bureaucrats with one fell swoop being able to just literally ban millions of people from owning firearms. People get fiduciary help for all sorts of reasons. Older people might just be tired of balancing their checkbook. They might want their wife or their son or their daughter or their husband, for that matter, helping them out a little bit. That literally would be a prohibited category if this administration gets their way. This is the biggest gun grab in the history of our country. Literally millions of people who are going to be banned from owning firearms by this president with his little pen, and we're going to do everything we can to stop him.
The folks at the Institute for Legislative Action have pointed out that the VA has already implemented a similar program designating veterans who've had a fiduciary take over their finances as prohibited persons. According to the LA Times article, 177,000 veterans have been placed into NICS. We are talking about, again, 4.2 million more Americans, Chris, that would be placed into NICS under this provision here. I've got to ask, what are the NRA's plans to try to stop this?
Well, let's go back just for a second. Think about what you just said. What you said is that this president, if you've served our country honorably, or if you've reached an age of retirement and you draw Social Security, this president doesn't think you should have firearms. That's a shocking indictment on this president. This is as serious of an abuse as I've seen in 23 years in this business. So what are we going to do about it? The response from not only our membership, but gun owners across this country, veterans across this country, people drawing Social Security across this country has been overwhelming, which is a great sign of that grassroots response. We're working with our friends on Capitol Hill right now. We've called on the president to immediately suspend this activity, and we're going to work with Congress that if he doesn't do it voluntarily, which we obviously don't expect him to, we're going to make him do it involuntarily. But this is, I can't stress the significance, and whether you whether you're a gun owner or not, if you know someone who's drawing Social Security or you know someone who has served our country honorably, you need to understand that this president has such little respect for them that he's willing to deny them a fundamental right based not on a judge, not on a finding, but based on some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. This is an outrage.
It absolutely is, Chris. And, I know that there are going to be Americans out there who are receiving Social Security who may be thinking again about having that representative payee help them with their accounts. Now, heck no. I mean, this is a prohibiting, allow somebody else to manage your finances for you. This is, as you say, something that millions of Americans, through no fault of their own, no action of their own, would be denied their right to keep and bear arms. And we haven't. We haven't ever seen anything like this before. And frankly, I'm really concerned that this is, again, not going to be the last move that we see by the president.
No, it's not. And we've been saying this all along, and unfortunately, we're just being further validated that this president's going to do everything he can between now and his last day in office to dismantle the Second Amendment. But what's sickening about it, and what's even more disingenuous about it, are the targets of his efforts. The targets of his efforts are people who have served this country honorably, our veterans, and people who might need a little help balancing their checkbook, not from the federal government, from maybe their son or their wife or their husband or their daughter, or maybe they're just tired of dealing with a checkbook and they want a little help doing it. That's a prohibited category from exercising a fundamental right, according to this president. Just imagine the outrage if we said, you know what, we're not going to let you vote if you need a little help, you need a little help balancing your checkbook. Or we're not going to let you go to the church or your synagogue or wherever your place of worship, or for that matter, not worship. I mean, if any other fundamental right was being disrespected like this, the media would be going absolutely ballistic. There would be riots in the street. But fortunately, the National Rifle Association and the friends that we do have out there are going to fight every day until we make sure this is rectified.
Chris, you talk about the impact that this has on veterans. We also know that the impact of active duty military members right now who feel perhaps threatened and under siege. We've seen a number of members of the U.S. Senate and members of Congress say that they want to introduce legislation that would allow for some members of the military on military bases to carry, would allow for recruiters to carry. In fact, General Ray Odierno said that he kind of elaborated on his comments, and he said this statement that he said, we have to be careful about over-arming ourselves. He said, what got confused was another question that asked me, do you think we should arm all our soldiers on all our installations? That I have a problem with. But he said he was not referring to recruiters. He is thinking about allowing recruiters to be armed. Where is the NRA in this discussion right now, Chris?
Well, we've called for the immediate repeal of the federal section that bars our soldiers from carrying domestically. This entire discussion we've had, Cam, would make for a hilarious Saturday Night Live skit if the repercussions weren't so fatal. We've literally lost, there have been over 100, or nearly 100 in the last 6 years, 100 military personnel either killed or wounded because they've been left defenseless at military installations and military bases. That's not how we do things in America. That's one of the, if it's bad enough that they're targeting veterans who've served this country and denying them the right to own a firearm, if that's not bad enough, now they're going after elderly people who might need a little help with balancing their checkbooks. And on top of that, if you think it couldn't get any more obscene, we have soldiers, the people that we trust, that we train and we trust to go and fight for our freedoms overseas, not able to exercise those same freedoms domestically. It's the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard, and that's saying something after spending 23 years in our nation's capital.
Do you, in your talks with members of Congress, Chris, again, we've seen a flurry of activity here. Is this something that you think Congress could move on again if they hear from Americans around the country?
Well, absolutely. We're working. Senator Moran's already introduced legislation. Senator Daines is working on legislation. We have Duncan Hunter in the House who's introducing legislation. There are letters being sent to the Pentagon. There there is a groundswell of support from the American people, which will lead ultimately to a groundswell of support in Congress. There's state issues that can be done as well. We're working with different states to allow for National Guard to provide this sort of protection while we continue to have this idiotic federal policy. But this is something that we're committed to. We're going to continue to work with not only our friends in the military who deserve this protection, but our friends on Capitol Hill who understand the importance of it. As long as we have the American people continuing to support these efforts, we're not going to stop until we get this overturned.
Obviously, anti-gun politicians and anti-gun activists would say that this would be the wrong step to take. Instead, we need to, make sure that every transfer of a firearm, including private transfers, go through background checks. We need to maybe ban semi-automatic rifles. We need to do these anti-gun steps to try to stop people from getting guns in the first place, Chris.
Yeah, as Rahm Emanuel said, never let a tragedy go to waste. And we're seeing it again. We saw it after South Carolina. We're seeing it again after Chattanooga. When here you have this jihadist wannabe murdering innocent people after passing Barack Obama's background check. This guy passed the president's federal background check twice. Okay, so what, you want him to pass it 3 times or 4 times? It's not going to solve anything. So instead of having a discussion about failed policies, why don't we have a discussion about other failed policies that need to be overturned, like the ban on firearms at military bases by our military personnel who we trust to defend our freedoms overseas and deserve those freedoms to be respected here. We welcome this discussion. We welcome this debate. We welcome it with the American people. We welcome it with the legislative bodies that represent the American people. And we're confident that in an intellectually honest debate, not only will we win, we'll win overwhelmingly, and we can start really doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is making people safer.
Chris Cox, Executive Director of NRA's Institute for Legislative Action. Again, what's your final message to NRA members? What should they be doing right now?
Call, write, email. If you still send a fax, but let your elected officials know at both the state and the federal level that, number one, you're watching what they're doing, and number two, that let's get serious, that we just had murders take place at military bases, and if the president won't do something about it, members of Congress need to step up and do their job and force the issue. We all have an opportunity to speak out, whether we're doing it in our neighborhoods or we're doing it on the floor of the House of Representatives or the floor of the U.S. Senate. We all need to get engaged. We all need to keep participating. And if we continue with a unified voice of doing something about these problems, I'm convinced that we can make a real difference here.
Chris Cox, thank you again, sir, for coming on the program, and thanks for all that you do.
Thanks, Cam.
Appreciate it. Chris Cox, Executive Director of NRA's Institute for Legislative Action.